Welcome to the Near Memo, a weekly conversation about search, social, and commerce. What happened, why it matters, and the implications for local. So let's move on to my item, the final item today, which is about content moderation, which is on everybody's mind because.
So just a question before you get started here.
Yeah.
So we're supposed to end on a positive note. I'm just laying that out for you to see where this goes.
It's going to be a long and winding journey.
Well, we'll find it. We'll find
okay,
it.
good.
Okay,
good.
and that's not an absolute requirement.
Oh, okay.
So privacy was long dismissed by Silicon Valley as like something that was in the past, and there was all the data mining and exchanges of data in the background unbeknownst to consumers, and then privacy came roaring back and became one of the biggest issues, if not the biggest issue that marketers have to contend with, although many are still in denial about that. From a publisher standpoint, content moderation is sort of becoming the equivalent, where there's a lot of effort, both legislatively and now in terms of the courts, to kind of limit or carve out exceptions to Section 230 of the Children's Decency Act, which protects publishers against immunity for content created by their users, right? And that's the thing that Google and Facebook and Twitter and others have pointed to when they get sued. We're not responsible for this. There's a case before the Supreme Court currently called Gonzalez v. Google. I won't go into the facts, but the idea is that YouTube should be held liable for some content that the plaintiffs are saying resulted in the death of one of their kids. And both the right and the left want to roll back Section 230 for different reasons. So that's one point. We've also got some cases coming out of Texas and Florida, not yet before the Supreme Court, but they will be, around social media. Both Texas and Florida tried to prevent the deplatforming of any politician, individual, after Trump got booted off of Facebook and Twitter. They tried to define social media sites as common carriers and saying you have to carry all the content that these people are creating and you can't boot them off. And the Texas law was upheld and the Florida law was struck down, creating a conflict in the circuits that the Supreme Court will ultimately have to resolve. The EU, with its Digital Services Act, has put Twitter on notice that unless you start moderating your content pretty strictly, which is the opposite direction that Musk is going, we're going to cut you off in Europe. We're going to force you to moderate, or you're going to not be available in Europe. And that's creating a really fascinating kind of maybe game of chicken that we'll see. We'll see what happens. But I think content moderation becomes a huge issue, assuming some of these cases come out in a certain way or the legislation passes. It's going to be a huge issue. And then there's the question of how you moderate the content, because do you have to hire hundreds of people to do that, or can you do that with machines? And that's the issue that, Mike, you were talking about earlier on a previous discussion about Google using AI-based moderation and some of the pitfalls with that. But I think the Twitter case is going to be really interesting because the EU is sort of setting up a pretty hardline position, and Musk now as a kind of a darling of the right, letting all the trolls and the haters back on the platform, which is being empirically documented that there's an uptick in hate speech and other things like that. They're on a collision course, even if the US doesn't do anything. So
a couple of things about 230. It's interesting to me that very little of the discussion around 230 surrounds reviews and the rights of businesses vis-a-vis fake reviews. Google has 100% immunity, not just from the review being left, but also in their behaviors towards the review, whether they take it down or they don't take it down. And businesses have virtually no rights in that context because the person who left the review owns the copyright. Google can either decide to take it down or not take it down. The voice of the business has nothing to do with it, or the veracity of the review has little to do with it. So I find that fascinating that that's been excluded.
Not from the DSA stuff. Fake reviews are part of that.
Oh,
but
are they?
We can,
okay.
yeah. I mean, it's not spelled out explicitly, but illegal content, fraud, disinformation, reviews are going to be a part of that. But go ahead.
And then the other point is just that obviously, to do it at the scale that YouTube and Google and all these other companies need to do it, they are going to need AI. But the problem is, in Google's case, and that I'm seeing in local, is it's AI only. And AI only is because there's such a high rate of false positives, is not a good solution. There needs to be both human moderation of some of these cases, and there needs to be an escape hatch or an appeal hatch
In a process.
and a
right?
process, right? It can't just be AI. I get why they say it has to be AI, but it can't be AI without human intervention and a process for correcting wrong mistakes. Like that story we talked about, I think we talked about it here, about in the New York Times, about the wife who sent the child's genitals on the man's phone.
Right.
And he
Yep.
lost his account and he can't get it back. It's like, okay, this is crazy.
Well, that
Right.
was a medical. That was a just to clarify. That was a parent sending a picture of a child to a doctor for a diagnosis.
Correct. And he got classified and
As a
sent to the
child
police,
porn,
and he got
yeah.
child porn. And it's like, oh my God, and this is where it will end up if there isn't better processes and better human sort of moderation.
Well, so one of the things at stake, if you curtail Section 230, I mean, there is no 230 in Europe at all. But if you curtail it here, then you get lawsuits. That will inevitably come. So in a piece that I wrote on Wednesday in the newsletter, I was trying to point out, I don't think I did this quite as strongly as I could have, trying to point out the conflict between these two Supreme Court cases. If they curtail 230 and find liability, and then if they say that these social media platforms have to carry all this content, then they're setting up the publishers for just a nightmare of litigation, because they force you to carry the hate speech or whatever it is, because people have different ideas about what that means. And then the people who are impacted are going to sue, and there'll be just suit after suit after suit. And these publishers will be fighting forever in court. Go ahead, David.
Even, I mean, it doesn't even have to be hate speech, but I don't
Well,
think
whatever.
that neither side
Reviews.
can agree on what's disinformation, right?
Right.
I mean, Mike Lindell is, everything he says is completely fabricated. But if you try to keep that off of your site because it's disinformation or misinformation, then he's going to sue you for getting deplatformed. So, I mean, to me, there's not going to really be a resolution here that's possible. There's going to be lawsuits no matter what.
Well, the disinformation piece, I think, is at the who has standing to bring a suit for disinformation is one question. But if you're harmed, like Mike's example, the business whose reviews are taken away and they lose business, right? Oh, we lost our reviews and we count on those to drive business, and we've lost this much business. They'll be suing.
Or the case where they get fake ratings and Google doesn't take them down because the ratings don't have any words in them.
Exactly.
The words can't violate the terms of service. So their ratings go from 4.5 to 3.5. That's a common
people
occurrence.
Be suing left and right. I mean, there'll be just a flood of litigation. I think there needs to be some Section 230 reform, because I think it's just unreasonable for some of the things that have gone on for these platforms to say, don't look at me, we have no responsibility whatsoever. And the Gonzalez case in particular is about the algorithm. It's not necessarily about the underlying content only. It's about terrorist content that was recommended. And so they're saying the algorithm is something that the site has control over, and they're recommending this illegal content or this hateful content, and that's what creates the liability. So there's a lot of complexity here, but for sure we'll see litigation. Some 230 reform is in order, but it needs to be handled very, 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 very carefully. So it'll be really fascinating to watch what happens with that.
Ringside seats.
Yes.
Get your popcorn. There's an optimistic.
Yes. Well, I mean, I think it'll be just really chaotic for people, and I don't think people have any sense that's coming. The Europeans are sort of giving the clearest indication that there's going to be some trouble, and they become, I mean, the interesting thing is that with GDPR, Europeans became sort of de facto regulators of these global companies, and California to a lesser degree, and now with the DSA and their rules around no illegal content, et cetera, strict content moderation rules, they're going to force that on all these companies all over the world. And I think one of the reasons why, Mike, you're seeing the uptick in Google's banishment or nuking of reviews is because I think my pet theory is that Google's preparing for that reality.
Right. They're going to say we nuked 3 trillion reviews, even
Right.
if 25% of them were legitimate. So.
And the hope that the good faith effort will stave off the fines, right? If we can prove good faith effort, then we get a pass or a buy or whatever from, the billions and billions in penalties that could come out of this.
I have a less grandiose theory, which is a new person is in charge of scam control and doesn't have enough people on his team with institutional knowledge. And so,
you're probably right. You're probably right, David. I'm giving
recipe.
I'm giving Google too much credit, perhaps. All right, so I have nothing positive to say other than I'm relatively healthy right now, and that's a good thing. And there's a lot still in this kind of cruddy world to be grateful for. So there's my bolted on artificial positive statement for the week.
All right. Hope you all had great Thanksgivings, and hope you all have a great month of December coming up.
Okay. See you next time.
Thanks for joining David, Mike, and Greg. To stay on top of the latest developments in local, subscribe to our newsletter at nearmedia.co. We'll see you next week.